Today we're recording the third of the Affinity Water podcasts looking at river health across Affinity Water's 3 regions. I'm joined today by
Kate Heppell.
Professor Kate Heppell.
Professor Kate Heppell, yes.
Kate, can you tell our listeners where we are?
Yeah, we're standing next to the River Chess, and we're actually by a series of fish ponds as well that are adjacent to the River Chess that aren't used anymore, but are actually sort of little wildlife havens at the moment.
Our local river catchments, they're used for all kinds of activities, recreation, wildlife. They're called a common pool resource because, of course, we also take water from them. Why is it important to study them? And that's what you're doing at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, I'm studying them because there are lots of pressures on these chalk systems at the moment, on these chalk rivers. And I'm trying to understand how we can stop the pressures compromising the many benefits in these river systems.
The one headline that we read over and over again is about pollution from water companies and farmers from sewage. But of course, Affinity Water is water only. But there's a really large concern about how polluted our rivers are.
Yeah, that's right. There's action for our rivers required on lots of different fronts, from global action through to national action and local actions as well. I mean, we really need to invest in our infrastructure for our rivers. We need to regulate our rivers to prevent pollution. We need some new practices in cross-catchment governance as well. And we need to really promote individual behaviour change as well, I think, to save our river systems.
We have covered catchments and cross-water company catchments in a previous podcast, but we're standing in Latimer Park, so we can say the River Chess is partly the responsibility of Affinity Water, partly the responsibility of Thames Water. Rivers don't know boundaries.
That's right, exactly. So, and also the pollution in one river system obviously can link to another river system that the river flows into, and again to the coast as well. So we really have to think about that when we're thinking about pollution issues in rivers. And it means that many different groups really have a role to play in putting right water quality issues in rivers. And it obviously makes the way forward fairly challenging, getting all these groups of people to work together.
Your research has concentrated on the health rivers and the pollutants in rivers.
That's right. I mean, I've looked at the pressures coming from various different sectors on our river systems. So as you've mentioned before, the water industry, pressures from agricultural activity, pressures from our road networks as well, which we can hear a little bit of that behind us, and are also from our own day-to-day activities and domestic habits, actually, that can lead to pollution in rivers.
Now, this is a leading question, and one probably that's more difficult and nuanced to answer than people might suspect. But how healthy are our chalk streams in your views? We're hearing that the government is being urged to take action to clean up our rivers, particularly our precious chalk streams, more precious than Bengali tigers. But the health of our chalk streams in the view of you, the expert.
Yeah, well, if we look at the national picture, then we have maybe 4 big challenges associated with the health of our chalk streams. Physical modifications of our rivers, which reduces diversity of flows, for example, and biological diversity, that needs addressing. We have agricultural pollution from rural areas, and that's thought to affect about 40% of our water bodies nationally. That's not just chalk streams, this is across all rivers. We have the sewage and wastewater treatment issues as well, and we have urban diffuse pollution, that's runoff from towns and from road networks as well. All of these are big challenges for our river systems at the moment. And the challenge differs really depending on the catchment land use and the population. So in some rural parts of the country, really our impacts from agriculture dominate. In the south,
we can just hear the tractors starting up
here. In the southeast, in the Thames catchment area where we are, we've hyperpopulation, and therefore sewage and urban diffuse pollution really predominate in the issues. So that there's no one solution, there's no one catch-all for all of these river systems. We really have to look on a catchment by catchment basis to tackle the problems of pollution.
But people like to attribute blame.
They do, but we will have to look at all of the different activities, I think, that are going on in the catchment. I mean, we have to understand what the priorities are. There is a limited budget for addressing these river issues. So we do need to prioritise, and in that way we do need to look at the range of activities in the catchment and prioritise which things need action.
And of course there are 2 regulators in the water industry, Ofwat and the Environment Agency, and the Environment Agency will be testing the rivers.
Absolutely, so there are lots of water monitoring plans in place, there's lots of water monitoring going on. on. I think one of the challenges for us is turning some of that monitoring into action plans on the ground as well. So there's a danger that plans don't turn into actions, or the best solutions are too expensive to implement. But yes, there's lots of monitoring going on. I think there are questions at the moment about how well resourced that monitoring is and whether we should be putting more money into resourcing monitoring and using things like real-time water quality sensors as well to understand what's happening in our rivers in real time and to be able to track, for example, pollution from rainfall events, which you can't do so well with just grab samples, which is really the backbone of what the Environment Agency do for their monitoring.
So as well as things or substances being discharged into rivers, rainfall is also a hazard.
Yes, it's not the rainfall per se, it's what the rainfall carries with it as it moves across from the land surface into the river system. So, for example, for chalk streams, there is a known issue with sediment moving into our chalk stream system. So when the rainfall is particularly intense, it can detach soil particles from bare soil surfaces and move that soil as sediment into the river system. When it gets into that river system, because these chalk streams have got gravel beds, this fine sediment coming into the system can basically infill around these gravels, and that becomes a real issue for trout and for other fish that spawn in these gravels. The eggs don't hatch out, and there are problems then with fish populations, which we see in these river systems. Sediment is something that the Environment Agency don't really look at, and we've not got a very good handle on the extent of the sediment problems in some of our river systems, in chalk streams in particular. So this is probably something important to look forward to as part of future Water Framework Directive and investments.
And 6 water companies in the southeast have just launched what they call Water Resources Southeast to plan for the huge demand there will be for water in the future, growing populations, towns nearby nearly doubling in size, on top of which they know that they've got to find new ways and explore new sites for reservoirs or share resources with other water companies further afield. It is a big challenge, isn't it?
It's a major challenge, and low flows in our chalk streams is a major challenge, and a major challenge moving forward because of climate change as well as because of changes to population. Under sort of climate change scenarios, we may see reduced groundwater recharge, for example. When it's hotter, we get more of the water being returned to the atmosphere and less water available to recharge the groundwater, and the groundwater is the main source of flow of water to these chalk rivers. That means low flows has all sorts of implications for water quality. So if you have, for example, a sewage treatment works that is discharging treated effluent into a river system, that tends to get diluted by the groundwater in terms of water quality. If you have low flows, you don't have that dilution. So this type of low flow problems could arise from a combination of the population but also from climate change as well.
And I know that people mistakenly think that if they see a chalk stream that isn't flowing wildly along, there's something wrong with the health of that chalk stream. But that's not so, is it, Kate?
Absolutely. It's really important to remember that these chalk streams have winter-borne sections quite naturally. They have sections that dry out and wet up on an annual basis as a result of the rise and fall of the groundwater in the catchment as well. And when you look around the country, you'll see lots of places with place names that have born in them, indicating that they are part of a winter-borne stretch, perhaps, of a chalk stream.
So that's what born means?
Yeah, so you were talking about a spring, essentially, and a winter-borne is one that will dry up, at certain times of the year. So really important to actually understand the catchment history, and I think that's where local people also have a role to play, is understanding, and they have a long memory of how the flows have changed in a river over time.
Now we talk about catchment partnerships at Affinity Water, whereby Affinity is facilitating local action groups, river groups, local authorities, farmers to talk about the health of the rivers and what can be done in their regions and areas to improve that river health. But who needs to be involved?
There are lots of different partners that should be involved, in my opinion, in sort of integrated catchment management moving forward. So one important partner I think that may have been lacking from the table in the past a bit is the local authorities. So if we're going to solve problems of surface runoff, for example, and road networks, local authorities are key to that. Also the Highways England as well, for example, really important to understand the implications of road runoff to our river systems and to be able to address them. So they need need to be around the table. Conservation bodies as well have a critical role to play in understanding not just the river channel itself, but of course the link between the river channel and its floodplain and the ecology and the biodiversity. This is all part of having a healthy river system and really important to include. And of course, when we talk about river management, we're not just talking about the channel, we're talking about the wider catchment, the land around and its land use. So local landowners and farmers and NGOs involved in the catchment activities, the wider catchment activities, are really important to have on board from the very beginning so that we can all work together in a positive way to address any of the pollution problems that are identified in a river system. I think obviously academics have their role to play, I would say that, but we can think about the more imaginative research aspects as well and bring those to the table and get people together to trial new ways of working to help pollution issues in rivers.
I think we just heard some nature bird sounds,
We did, yes.
which mingled with the farmyard machinery.
Absolutely.
So just to testify, we are standing by the River Chess, but it shows the sounds themselves show the activities that go on around a river, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can obviously hear the wildlife here. That there's lots of wildlife around us at the moment, taking advantage of the nice reed beds that are here, ponds, and of the sort of general trees and riparian areas as well.
But your secondment,
Yeah, so the secondment is 1 year secondment to help with the water quality theme of the Thames Water's Smarter Water Catchment. So I'm seconded to Chilterns Chalk Streams Project to help identify the sort of baseline water quality of the River Chess so that we can see whether things improve moving forward through the 5-year project.
now teams at Affinity Water have been instigating what they call a river health metrics to kind of be able to say to people, this river is healthy, it needs X, Y and Z, or that river is unhealthy and we should all work together to improve it. It's amazing that there hasn't been anything like this previously, isn't it? That people haven't collaborated to gauge the health of local chalk streams and rivers.
Obviously, we have the Water Framework Directive we look at. We look at the ecological aspects of a river there, the biodiversity, the geomorphology and the sort of flows, etc. So all of that comes together as part of the Water Framework Directive classification, and that's what people have really used to gauge the health of the river system, and all of the data sets that organisations like CABA have brought together as well are of use to rivers trusts in order to assess the health of their river. And these kind of metrics that are being developed now, which involve also sort of the wider stakeholders in the river and wider concerns, are obviously something for the future that will be really useful for us as we move forward to next stages of the AMP process, for example.
And I think what you're also saying is that there's now a public perception, realisation that we're all involved in river health. We just don't leave it to the regulators, the Environment Agency, or these CAPA groups, or what might be called the more administrative bodies. That it is almost a citizens' uprising on the health of our river.
I think there has been somewhat of a citizens' uprising, yes, but I would hope that, although obviously citizens have a role to play, we also recognise that the regulators need to do their job, that the water companies need to do their job, and everybody needs to bring their bit to the table here as well. But I'm really heartened that we have a lot of interest from the public in rivers now, and from stakeholders interested because of some of it galvanised by wild swimming, but also other activities that people are doing in the river systems, and that's really heartening and I think is really raising the profile of the situation with our rivers in England at the moment.
Let's trudge on our walk now by the River Chess and just perhaps have a more optimistic note when we see nature thriving.
Lovely.